We have Terra Angela here, who I think I made you a co-host, and there you
Yes,
are.
that's me.
Tara's been a friend for a long time. She's now a junior at Cornell, and she came last time and got was looking for data sets and found a data set on Spotify and has done a study on it. So what have you found?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Jackie for keeping the violists in mind. That's me. Yeah, so I found a couple things. I looked into, this is from like a open source community for data scientists called Tidy Tuesday. They have weekly prompts for code exercises, and one of them was Spotify distinctions. So that pointed me towards Spotify's web API that has a lot of interesting genre distinctions. First of all, are we waiting for Hazel
No,
Savage by chance?
people got caught up, so we're
No.
just going to go. So you're the
Okay.
star.
I'll just go for it then. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Terra Angela Hurtado. I am a junior at Cornell University, and I'm studying information science. So my specialty is data scientist stuff with music specifically, because that's the kind of education I've received up until this point. Yeah, so I don't know how many of you guys know the story with Old Town Road by Lil Nas X, but that's sort of what inspired this project. And it inspired me to look into classifications within music, because that sometimes actually does make or break hit potential in a track more than you would think. So what happened to Lil Nas X with his track was that it was originally published as country. So when it went viral on TikTok and on social media, it was like a trap country song, and that sort of caught on quickly with people. So that started to rise on Billboard's charts, on the country charts specifically. And then what happened was, this was a 100% internal decision, and none of us are privy to the information that they have, but Billboard decided to remove it from their country charts.
It was racist.
Yeah. Yeah, that's sort of part of my argument, was that I didn't think that they had the authority to do that. If the artist published it as a country song, I wanted to maybe lobby a little bit for that. But yeah, so the fact that it rose on the country charts was a big part of why that song was so popular. So when they took it off of the country charts, it sort of lost the opportunity to rise in the normal pop charts. So what happened was the label reached out to Billy Ray Cyrus. I'm sure all of you guys know this story, but Billy Ray Cyrus, yeah, exactly. Thank you, Ryan. Billy Ray Cyrus was featured on the remix. And then Billy Ray Cyrus, who has a lot of ethos within the country community, that sort of got it back up to its original branding, which was as a country rap song, which as it was. So let me see if I can share my screen here. And I'll put in the chat for anyone who wants to follow along. I have a GitHub repository for that if anyone wants to look at the actual code there.
We don't have that long, so definitely.
That's fine. Yeah, I'll skip over all this stuff that has citations. But you know, we can take a look at some graphs because those have colors and those are really fun to look at. If anyone wants to look further, obviously the code is available on Git. But yeah, so I wanted to basically showcase some of the interesting stuff that Spotify can tell us. I was hoping to talk to Hazel actually about this because there's a lot of really interesting ways that they choose to classify their music. I guess some examples are, there's here in this graph, this is a box plot, you can see that they use words like danceability to classify what they have in songs. So there's track popularity, there's track duration, and those are more objective categories. But they've got other categories that they use like valence, which I had to look up, but apparently that measures a sadness in a track. So there's more subjective values, right? Like there's valence, there's energy, there's danceability, and then those are not as easily plotted. Like those are not things that you can measure. So when I'm looking at genres like that, I wanted to look at some of the more subjective values, right? So here's a graph of danceability, and I looked at 3 genres. I looked at Latin, pop, and rock. And there's a lot of insights that you can get from data like this, right? Like Latin has a lot of outliers, which sort of tells me as someone who likes Latin music a lot that maybe Latin is a broader genre than what Spotify maybe treats it as, right? Like according to Spotify, if it's in Spanish, it's Latin. Here's another one that I wanted to look at was valence. So while valence is a measure of something subjective like sadness, there's clearly like a trend here, right? So EDM has a lot of clustering towards the left, and Latin has a lot of clustering to the right. So what that tells me is that Latin music is really broad as a category, and there's a lot of sad songs, and EDM doesn't have quite that same amount of sadness, right? So then there's other things like duration that you can look at, which are objective qualifiers. And so here we're looking at, I talked with Brian about this, but there's a negative correlation, which just tells me that that songs that are shorter tend to be more popular within, obviously, this industry standard of about 3 minutes, which is where this mark is. So there's a lot of insights, right, that Spotify can tell us, and it tells us these things for free. So pitch class is another one I thought was really interesting. So pitch class is a way that a lot of musicians use to qualify like key of a song. It's easier to use when you're coding. So here, if you can look at this pitch class of 3, that's E flat. And for some reason, I cannot place it. Musicians do not like writing in the key of E flat. There's a very like
on the E string, right?
Yeah, that could be something to do with it. It could be guitar, but you know, I was thinking as a pianist too that E flat is an easier key to play on the piano because the black keys make it easier to jump around. So I mean, I thought maybe that would sort of qualify to make it a better key. I don't know. I truly don't have an argument for why people don't like E flat. But you know, the numbers don't lie. Spotify has a significantly smaller count of songs which are written in E flat. I guess keep that in mind next time you're writing something. Yeah, so then here's acousticness versus popularity. And this is another distinction I like, is just between EDM and Latin. They're very different in valence and acousticness, which is another one I thought was interesting. So yeah, I wanted to see why Spotify chose those. You know, why those factors were what Spotify chooses to use. Why acousticness? Why energy? Why danceability? And it's because there's huge distinctions within genre, which are so interesting to look at. So tempo is another one that's interesting because it's objective and you can see patterns really easily in objective data. So if you're looking at graphs of tempo by popularity, you can see that EDM is going to be 120, which I'm sure everyone here knows. But if you look at Latin, there's a lot more distinctions, right? Which is another signal that tells me that maybe Latin music is miscategorized as a whole when we should be putting it into smaller categories, right? If you've got like a slow tempo, sad Latin ballad, maybe it should be a pop ballad instead of Latin, which takes precedence as a genre. And then that's just me speaking. I'm a member of Grammy U, which is a university group for Recording Academy students. And I actually attended the Grammys last year, and I noticed that the Latin artists were treated really differently. They sort of hung out totally different. They have their own Grammy ceremony. There's a lot of differences in the way that they're treated, right? And I just thought that was kind of weird. And now I'm looking at this data and I'm like, yeah, it's because I think there's something wrong with the way that genre is classified. And that same sort of thing happened to Lil Nas X, right? There's a race factor and Spotify is not showing it to me, but I can see it because this doesn't look right. Yeah, and then this is just math stuff, which I can skip over, but I'm essentially looking at the difference between subjective values and objective values. What I'm looking at specifically is this log likelihood value. So this is a very high number, and then when I ran it on the objective categories, it's hugely negative, right? Because the logarithmic graph shoots off towards 0 in the left direction. And then what that just tells me is that the subjective values that I found, like energy or danceability, those are normally distributed, which essentially means that that's a pattern that would appear in nature. And if you're looking at things like pitch class and you're looking at things like duration, those do not appear in nature. And then that's the last oomph I need to tell me that Spotify chose these categories specifically because they're things that would appear in nature in a normal distributed fashion, and that way you can find outliers really easily and you can make genre distinctions. And then this is more data, and then this is more math. And I don't need to go over it here. But if anyone is interested, you can check out the GitHub link. And I think I'll wrap it up there.